Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Go Beyond the Status Quo, Dolby Atmos Music Masterclass. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation using your computer's speaker system by default, but if you'd prefer to join over the telephone, just select Phone Call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing them into the Questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Ceri Thomas.
Thanks, Cody. Hi, I'm Ceri Thomas. I work for Dolby, doing Dolby Atmos music, and I'm joined here today with Nick Rives from Capitol Studios, and thank you so much for taking the time. As we've discussed previously, wish we could all be together in Austin doing this, but alas, it was not meant to be. So I'll have to get barbecue another time. Nick, tell us a little bit about your background. Give us an introduction to yourself, and then we'll dive into Atmos in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. And in some ways, I suppose, welcome to my home. Yeah, I wish really badly that we could all be sitting in the same room talking about this because it's so much more fun that way, but here we are. My name is Nick Rives. I am a staff engineer for Capitol Studios in Hollywood, California. And I'm from San Francisco originally, and I've been working at Capitol here in Los Angeles for about 7.5 years now. And my role there has sort of gone through the sort of traditional arc as I started as a runner, and then I, was more of a leadership role with that team, and then I was asked to join the staff as an engineer, and I have been doing it ever since. And so that's kind of what has led me here. I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of great engineers and artists and creatives and performers, and of course people who work in the industry. And along the way, I was introduced to Dolby Atmos, and it's just been a roller coaster ever since, and one I have absolutely enjoyed. So here I am.
Fantastic.
We are talking about it.
So obviously, we talk a lot about Capitol Studio C and the sort of setup that's there. But you were kind of there at the beginning when it was all installed and everything was brand new, right? So what was your first impression of Dolby Atmos?
Well, I mean, my first impression was basically amazement, and I know that sounds, really hyperbolic, but it's true. It's not that often that you get exposed to something unlike anything you've experienced before. As I have gotten older, I've become to appreciate more and more how special something like that is, and that feeling with Atmos is something that I've been able to hold on to for the 3 years we've been doing this. Studio C has been an incredible mix room in Los Angeles for a very long time. That room, I mean, we talk about, the design elements that go into making a studio control room, and then also a little bit of that luck and a little bit of that magic, a little bit of that will, if you will. And Studio C has always encumbered all of those things. And a testament to that is simply the music that's been mixed there. So, being at Capitol, we are often kind of exposed to some new technologies, and we're very fortunate to be in a position where we can have some partnerships with some different folks who are very creative and very forward looking when it comes to the way they think about music and storytelling. And so in our conversations with Dolby, and this kind of elusive sort of topic of immersive audio started to kind of float its way around the halls, and the term Atmos, it had been around, but we'd almost always associated it with film and cinema experiences. And I mean, it's not unheard of to have technological conventions that exist for specific places, and so it was cool to hear about that. I mean, you think about cinema going experiences and how that's, the reason we go is because they're awesome, and they go, it goes beyond what we're capable of doing at home. So, at first I felt like, okay, cool, a next generation of surround perhaps, or, or maybe there's, higher resolution or more speakers or something like that. I thought that was great. But I hadn't really experienced it. And then we started talking to Dolby about music in the format. And, it became clear to me that this was sort of a new this was a genuinely new conversation. Like this was something that we weren't being asked what our opinion was. We were asked what we thought would be possible. And so, we being a community of people who are always willing to do whatever to experiment with whatever's the cutting edge of technology, we went for it. And so my boss, Art Kelm, who is the kind of chief technical engineer and runs the studios at Capitol and some of our other locations. He builds and maintains our rooms and is kind of the spearhead of our our kind of the design concepts of our spaces. So he and the Dolby team tore C apart, made it a big old hole in the ground, which is always a fun and terrifying experience. And there was a design that had been reached as far as like what would be a great way to approach an Atmos system in the room. And mind you, I was not a part of this particular part of the conversation. I was aware of it because we're all hanging out and we just nerd out all day. But I wasn't making these decisions necessarily. I was just happy to be along for the ride. And so with the size of the room and the kind of the goal for what we were looking to do, we ended up going with what's basically a 9.1.6 monitoring scheme. And there were some design decisions that went into building the space that were addressing specifically the musical experience versus the cinema experience. And so the kind of the shorthand that we have used for that is that it is a near field listening music Atmos space. That I could be more elegant than that, but in principle, that's exactly what we're talking about. What is it that, if you look at the difference between a soundstage and a recording studio, there are a lot of fundamental differences, most obvious being the size of the space. And secondly, the relationship between you and the speakers. Dub stages are movie theaters with giant mixing consoles in it, and that's awesome because you're making a product specifically for that space. Well, mixing music, it wasn't about mixing for a movie theater. It wasn't about, to be frank, we didn't exactly know what it was going to be for, but we figured, okay, if we want to do this as record makers, where that is what we do and that is our priority, then what are some things we want to come up with that would make this type of system reflect what we know as being optimal music experience in a recording studio and more specifically a control room space. So some of those design elements were traditionally the side speakers are above you, and we brought those down to ear height to kind of reflect more of that near field experience. And another big aspect that was a part of Art's design, and it's always been kind of a big thing for him, is minimizing the amount of technical apparatus that you're being exposed to, and making it feel more like a comfortable open space. So the sidewalls that are now at ear height were put behind fabric and tuned accordingly, and the rear speakers are the same. The overhead speakers are on trusses, and that was because we didn't know exactly how firm the overhead spec was, because that's an entirely new avenue for us. And for those of you who may have questions about what I'm talking about, is Atmos has overhead speakers. So we have speakers like in a traditional surround system in front of us, sides and behind, but we've now also opened up above us to get that Z-axis going and really start putting the immersive in immersive. And so Art came up with this idea to put those on trusses that we could move so that we didn't have to commit so incredibly to those positions, because it's Wild West, totally new territory. And and he, being a engineer, figured, why don't we design a system that we don't have to break in order to change. Relatively brilliant idea, except that we put those speakers up, tuned them, and it sounds so good we haven't moved them in 3 years. But let me tell you, the lighting guys love it. They hang lights on that all the time. It's great. Anyway, we had this room.
Yeah. Well, and once the room was together, what was the first thing that you heard in that space? I mean, there was no music in Atmos at that time.
Well, a lot of noise in the beginning. A lot of pink noise. And signal sweeps and whoops and hollers, which is great. No, but Capitol is a wonderfully kind of open door social place. So there was no hesitation to just walk in the room and be like, all right, what's up? How are we doing? What's it sound like? But once it had all been set up and treated and tuned and calibrated, and everybody was in there just really working to make it sound great. Once it was all up, the first thing I ever heard were two pieces that were created by Dolby. They were kind of teasers. You know, I always, when I describe them to people, I say they're like the, you know, the beginning of the movie, and you see the big fancy sound that makes, I don't want to say brand names, but THX, and you hear the giant sound, and it blows your hair back, and you're like, oh my God, I'm in a theater, this is great. So there were a couple of those that Dolby had made. One was called Unfold, which was really just a slap across the face. I mean, laser beam action. It was amazing. I mean, it was, well, I shouldn't say amazing, because the second thing I saw was called Amaze. But so Unfold was this, you know, completely synthesized. There was a visual aspect to it, but its sole purpose was to accentuate what you were hearing. Completely synthesized sound effect sort of experience that just had stuff whipping all around, up and down, left, right, forward, the sub, you know, pushing air with the subs like crazy, which I love. And it was truly remarkable.
Cool.
But of course, that was its job. So naturally, I'm like, okay, of course that's remarkable. This is what Dolby designed to make you go, damn, this is really cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, you know, it's the proof's in the pudding when it comes to the music. But the second thing we heard was called Amaze, which also had a visual accompaniment, and it was in a rainforest. And so, you know, it's really hitting you with the immersive side, which is all great. I mean, it was, you know, I'm hearing the rain above me, and I'm hearing it hit the leaves around me. This bird goes around, and you know, they do thunder, so the subs light up like crazy. So that was all really awesome from a hi-fi audiophile, I love big speakers, let's have it kind of experience, you know, which I'm all for. That's why I'm here in the first place. But it was all rooted in the cinema perspective. You know, it was all about enhancing the narrative of a visual that you're seeing, you know, and so much of stage and imagery when it comes to creating and mixing music has to do with creating something larger than life, unrealistically massive, while also intimate at the same time. You know, spaces that virtually do not exist unless you and one other person are sitting in a cathedral, maybe. Like, you know, so while I was immediately impressed with technology, and of course the wheels start turning about what I can do with music, there was a certain amount of, I have no idea how to do that. What's under the hood of this thing? How do I mix in it? You know, am I on the console? Am I in a DAW? What am I doing? Raw audio, plugins? Like I knew nothing about the rest of it. So of course it opened up as many questions as it did inspirations. But I did immediately know that, like, all right, this is super cool. I haven't heard this before. This is not surround, and I want to know more because I'm really into what I'm hearing. So that was kind of my sort of intro to it. You know, just come in here and listen to this.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about, you know, that first project then, and because you'd had this cinematic experience, and you know, the Dolby trailers and all the things that could be done, and how did you decide what should be done? Was it, you know, a lot of experimentation, or, you know, what were the rules there?
Well, first of all, no rules.
And what was the first project?
So, okay, the first project, which was by no means anything I chose, and I only say that because I'm not, you know, I am very happily you know, an extension of that studio. You know, I am the human component to that system. My job is to make sure it works and bring maybe a little bit of free thinking creativity to it. But other than that, you know, I was more or less in an assistant engineer position for our first project, which was the 25th anniversary re-release and new Atmos mix of REM's Automatic for the People, the whole record. I mean, you know, how the decision for that to be the first project, I mean, that's above my pay grade. I don't ask questions. Someone says, we got a record for you. I say, fabulous, let's go. And I'm happy with that. But anyway, so, you know, this, of course, now we've got a real project. So it's no longer an airtight bubble of technological experimentation. We have an album to make. It's going to be due in a certain amount of time. There's a creative aspect to, you know, what is it that we're trying to do? Oh, and we're also doing this thing that's never been done before. So there's nothing we can really relate to other than surround mixes that had already existed. But we really wanted to just kind of go freeform with this. We wanted to sort of, you know, let's just go, you know, and we were very fortunate that there was a lot of support for the project. So we had a fair amount of time in the studio to do this, to, you know, break it and break it again and call Ceri and then break it and then call Ceri. You know, I mean, the first week was half calling Ceri because we didn't know what we were doing. And, you know, it's you know, and it's not like, you know, in the beginning, there's a lot of technology involved as well that you need to learn about, you know, and that's in no way means to sound like it's daunting, but when you've got a full size facility and you've got 3 different computers working in harmony and symphony with each other, all networked and everything's groovy, you know, I mean, there was, you know, there's some things that there's some learning that comes with that. You know, fortunately, we have a really great team at Capitol and Dolby is incredibly supportive. But anyway, you know, so that project definitely came with some hardships, but it also came with some incredible victories and some very first introductions to what's so powerful about Atmos. So I'm there assisting Cliff Norrell, who's the primary, you know, A1 on the project, and he was the original engineer for that album. So he had such incredible intimate knowledge of all the material that there was no guesswork to be done in terms of what are these compositions like, what, you know, I mean, yeah, so record's been out for 25 years, everybody knows, but it was also, you know, he knows every nut and bolt, he knows where all the bodies are buried. So he's got, you know, de facto expertise in the material, you know, and then also over our shoulders was Scott Litt, the original producer and just overall badass talent, who really was incredibly enabling to the, let's just go for it, let's do it. You know, he had this, you know, this great attitude of, it doesn't matter, we're not being held to any standard and we can do whatever we want, and let's create something really cool that, you know, we haven't been able to do before, and also, you know, be able to share with a new generation this incredible body of work in a new way. And so 3 weeks later, we had a record.
Fantastic.
And it was great.
And the good thing is that answers one of the questions that's coming on QA, so well done.
Okay, good. Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, it was a great experience, and we were very lucky that we were given a lot of leeway to be able to kind of just do the experiments and stuff. And what came from that was the building blocks of my mix practices now. Things I learned not to do, things I learned to do, things I thought were cool and have since learned that maybe I should do differently, you know? I mean, and I think for all, you know, all of us engineers, that's just the reality of this existence that we've chosen, you know, and like all artists, really, you know, you learn things, you change things, you do things, you move forward, but you got to have that first jump off the cliff, you know, you got to have that first leap of faith. So I think for me, I was very fortunate to be part of a team that was ready to just go all in, and we had this universal vision of just like embracing this new technology and trying to tell our story.
Cool. So you mentioned Scott Litt was in the room with you as well as Cliff. Did that help to sort of get the intention of the original album and thought processes that were going on, you know, 25 years ago in the studios before Capitol?
Oh yeah.
And how did that help guide the project and the learnings that you were able to do? To take any of the pressure off or add more?
Well, it took the pressure off of me, because I didn't have to learn every nook and cranny of the record in the same way that I do if I'm alone with no guidance. You know, because it's very critical. Like for me, intention is such an important part of the process creatively. You know, and there is no better avenue of, you know, singularity between you and the artist than to have them in the room, or somebody who represents them and has the trust of the artist in the room. You know, so someone like, you know, Scott Litt, like, you know, he was doing string arrangements on that record along with John Paul Jones, and like, you know, he has a vision for what the purpose of that string part in terms of the arrangement. You know, all composers, you know, they know better than anybody what the purpose of the parts are. You know, sometimes it's to sound cool, and sometimes it's like to create this harmonic balance or a counterpoint or add tension to the second chorus or something, you know, whatever that may be. And so having his clarity on the purpose of the different aspects of the arrangement and composition really was a benefit to us in terms of understanding how to start making the decisions we make. And a lot of the kind of philosophy behind that has stayed through to my process, you know, to this very day. You know, what is the purpose? You know, this composition, the decisions that were made, because, you know, for those of us who've had the privilege of being in the room with a band and true creatives, you know, these decisions are labored over intensely, and they all have purpose and meaning, and why this guitar part made it and this guitar part got muted or whatever that might be. You know, these are incredibly heavy decisions on the artist's part. And so we, you know, being entrusted with their material to mix, you know, my first move in any mix, stereo or Atmos, but particularly Atmos because of the stage involved, what are the relationships between the different elements of the composition? What am I supposed to be listening to? What am I not supposed to be listening to, but feeling instead? Why is this part doubled, but this part is singular? You know, what emotional impact, what sonic impact, what balance elements, tonal elements, or emotional content is being expressed through the decision to have these different parts of the arrangement? So that is the building blocks of all my mixes, especially in Atmos. And I think my experiences, you know, overall, but definitely having my first major Atmos project be with those original creatives and people who are able to frame the decisions we made from a compositional perspective, I think really helped me create the building blocks of how I now think about doing an Atmos mix.
Cool. So, I mean, we talked a lot about intention. You've worked on a wide variety of content, you know, from rock and pop through jazz and classical. Do you find the intention of, you know, how you're moving an Atmos mix forward shifts with any of those particular genres? Have you learned something not to do in one?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what was really interesting, kind of, and especially reflecting on it now, hindsight being what it is, Atmos has taught me an incredible amount about how we use the stage, you know, and so and what do I mean by that? By the available space that we have. So like it's hugely influenced my stereo mixes, because it helps you understand why things sound the way they sound and how different genres are affected by space and time, because they are ultimately the same thing. So like intention, to get back to the root of the question, intention. You know, in stereo we've got you know 201 degrees of you know, point value resolution of space, and we have to decide what our image is going to be. You know, there are really basic examples of this: drummer's perspective or audience perspective. You know, this is a classic. You know, everyone's done it different. You know, I mean, and everyone has a different reason for why they like it to be a certain way. You know, so we always make decisions about that stage all the time. And Atmos, you know, now we have, not only do we, I mean, we have so much more, right? Now we have a wider stereo image that's generated. We have sides, which could be argued as the ultimately widest vantage point, 90 degrees. We have all around us continuous and up and over us continuous. You know, so we are immersed, you know, into a specific environment that is of our choosing as the engineer. So we can decide like all kinds of decisions that are available to us. Are we seeing a band in a club and we're in the middle of the room? Are we, is this like an electro track where we are like simply inside of this phenomenal space of sound and energy that has no bearing in reality and yet is so stimulating that it keeps us from standing still? You know, are we in an orchestral hall? Is it a funk band and we're in the middle of the band, so like there's a member all around us? You know, I did a mix once that was like, you know, I'm an electric bass player and I used to play in a bunch of different kinds of bands. But one of the most fun things about rehearsing with a band is, you know, you're standing in a circle and everyone can see each other and there's this lively, everything's pointing at you. This, you know, there's no wrong spot to be. And so, you know, I did this mix like that, where, you know, you get drum and bass are in front of us with the vocal a little bit up, and then, you know, we've got keys over here and clav over here, guitar over there, you know, horns behind us. You know, we're standing in the band. You have all of these narrative decisions that you get to make. And the medium with which we tell our story gives us different dimensions. You know, for the same reason that a comic book feels different than a novel, you know, our medium of storytelling is an enormous tool for us to express ourselves. And for me, you know, all art is based in storytelling, and all storytelling is based on a decision as to what you want your audience to experience. And as a tool for music, I have found that Atmos greatly expands my ability to tell a story or give you a more specific experience that is all serving the music. You know, I mean, dude, it's super easy to just fly stuff around and do laser beam stuff. Like, I mean, it's remarkably easy to do that, but it is also remarkably easy to get tired of that. You know, the tool is only as useful as it is beneficial to your ability to tell the story you want to tell. You know, and I'm not saying it's inappropriate to fly stuff around, because sometimes that's super fun. But using the tool for the tool's sake is fun for a day. Using the tool to tell your story is fun forever. You know, so I think that that is kind of something hey, you know, but you know, so that's a big part of how I think about intention and space. You know, what the first thing I do is just listen to the song. You know, most of what I do as a UMG mixer for, you know, I work for Capitol, I report to UMG, I mix a lot of material for them. The first thing I do is listen to the song. I know, crazy idea. I listen to the song and try and understand what the intention of the artist is portraying to me. You know, is this a party track? Is this a melancholy track? Is this a beautifully represented and reproduced, like, organic experience that happened in one place and time? Or is this a completely fabricated, not art? When I say the word artificial, it's not a negative. I just mean that, like, synthesized track that never was a band playing in a room, and yet invokes a huge wealth of emotion. You know, so what are the elements that are involved in the piece of music I'm working in? What is the story that the artist is trying to tell, and how can I use Atmos to expand on that experience, to make that, to immerse you into the story that the artist is telling? You know, and sometimes it's a matter of, are the guitars distorted? Sometimes it's a matter of, are the lyrics sad? Sometimes it's a matter of, wow, this is a super complicated composition, and I'm going to need to really, like, figure out what all these voices are doing and find out where they're going to go. You know, so intention is the root of all decision making, I think, in most art, or at least, I mean, should is not a real term for art, but it's something that I can use to guide my decision making, especially when working on other people's material, because it's not, you know, no one's, you know, it's not me people are listening to. They're listening to the artist because they recognize something in the artist's story that they relate to. And so I am simply a harbinger for that emotional context, that story, that narrative, and it's my obligation to the artist to maintain their intention, while exploring, you know, some technological proficiency at this tool set that I am fortunate enough to have worked at for a while.
That's fantastic. So, you know, this masterclass, good to have the background on the level set and things like that. But let's dive in and take a look at some of the techniques that you've developed with your colleagues at Capitol. And so I think if you're able to share your screen.
Let's see what we got here.
For what we're not going to do here is sort of enable this this playback and listening to what's actually happening. Fundamentally, the system doesn't hold up too well to doing that. So I'm just going to spend some time talking through the techniques, and we can you know, we can dive in as much as you want, but the audio experience is not going to be what you desire it to be. So we're not going to even attempt to do.
Yeah, I know. What a drag. I wish nothing more. We were sitting in some super rad studio and you could hear everything I'm doing in detail. But unfortunately, in these trying times, we find ourselves remoted. So, but I'm happy to share with all y'all my, you know, the kind of environment in which I work. So what I have up here that we're looking at is my DAW, Pro Tools. There are, of course, others, and I'll never tell anybody they got to use one or the other, but I've been using Pro Tools forever, so it's what I use. What can I say? I like it, and I know all the key commands. And then, of course, over here we have Dolby's RMU interface. So we're seeing all of the primary components of the Atmos mix as it exists. And then, of course, over here we have my content. This is just gonna
pause for a moment because I know the question's going to come up. So you're operating here in the production suite environment.
Yes.
Because you're at home, you're not in your Capital Studios mastering
True.
suite
True.
916 environment. So this is using Dolby Audio Bridge to pass audio between Pro Tools and the renderer. But all of the techniques are applicable, whether it's mastering suite, production suite, or in the cinema environment as well. So just level set there.
No, exactly. And look, like I'm not here to peddle equipment or gear or anything like that, but I mean, I know y'all want to know. So I'm on a Mac Mini. I'm on a 2018 Mac Mini that's timed out. So it's got the i7 6-core and 64 gigs of RAM, and a couple of UAD units. I have 10 cores of their DSP, and I'm using an Apollo 8 interface for my listening experience. All of that is simply the gear that I have and use. I'm not telling you to get it. You don't need it necessarily, but it's just, here's my rig. This is what I'm on. I'm at home. I have one computer. I'm mixing in Atmos with no serious limitations in terms of my ability to create Atmos content. So that's awesome, especially when you think about that. Like if I'm in capital C, I have 3 machines and it's just a phenomenal array of outboard hardware that's interfacing in MADI and just like, great, awesome multiple screen situation, hi-fi stuff that you would expect from a studio of that caliber. I also, as you can probably see, do not have a speaker system for Atmos. Believe me, I wish I did. And Ceri and I were just talking about, stacking books and running cables and figuring that out. But the reality was I wanted to kind of dive into what I can do without that during this time. And, hopefully, make best use of the fact that I'm not in a super awesome studio to learn about better how to do the job without it. Because damn it, we're engineers and nothing will stop us. If we deserve that name, then nothing should be able to stop us. Anyway,
and just before again we dive in, you have done some work that is currently released in your studio in this environment, and checked
yes.
it on a studio system, not
yes.
at Capital, but in an Atmos enabled room as
private Atmos studio that I know and trust. Yes, absolutely. I have found in this time, I mean, I kind of knew this before, but it's really kind of proven itself in this time I've been at home, that I can get mixes from, file delivery to about 85%, 90% at home. Now, I say I can do that, but I have to say that I can do that because I've been mixing in speakers for years. So yes. there are techniques that I know do what I'm trying to do, and I can express myself using certain techniques that might not have made themselves apparent to me had I started in headphones. So while I say I can bring tracks that far, I have to admit that a fair amount of that is due to some of my experience that I've had up to this point in speakers. But yes, so I'm in headphones, and I know half of you just went, what headphones? And I'm like, whatever. It doesn't matter, which is awesome. So just use the ones you like. Just use the ones that you like. If you got to know, I've got some M50s. I've got some buyers over there. I've got these crazy IDs that I borrowed from a friend because God knows I can't afford that, but it's like these crazy, super hi-fi stuff, and that's pretty fun too. Yeah. And then occasionally I'll go to my molded in-ears just to audition the in-ear experience. And no, I'm not necessarily sitting here just constantly playing Ring Around the Rosie with my headphones. I stick to the ones I know, but it's headphone agnostic. So just go for it. Just use the ones you like and use the ones you trust. And there's no wrong answer. And if there is, forget about it. But anyway.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask you some questions about what I see on your screen. And
let's do it.
Feel free to tell me to go away or to ask something else, and that'll be fine. So the first thing I see there is a set of tracks that you have labeled O-Bed.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, here we go. This is the good stuff. So crash course on the way Atmos distributes audio, and we'll go over here to the RMU and look at that. We've got a bed, which is traditional surround, right? Let's not beat around the bush here. It's traditional surround. That is 7.1.2 channel-based audio distribution. And pretty early on, myself and the team at Capital decided to abandon the bed. And you might be thinking, okay, why? So object-based mixing, right? I have all these objects, I create them, I put them in space, and they end up being my mix over here, as we can see, right? It's an incredibly satisfying experience to just move audio freely in space. And what the renderer is doing, and I'm sure some of you know this, but here we are, you know, is interpreting the data that I've made, the metadata being sent from the DAW, and it's creating this virtual mix that exists. And it can be actualized on any different radical combination of speakers. I mean, it can be, you know, from your basic traditional 5.1, can be stereo. You can have 64 speakers in your space. You know, there's really no limit. And the resolution of your experience, it can scale to the number of speakers and the amount of kind of staging that the system you're listening on is able to create. So objects get interpreted in real time to whatever's going on. So if I take an object and I put it, you know, right over my shoulder, it's going to be the RMU system, whatever system that is, consumer playback, pro playback, movie theater playback, is going to do everything it can to put that there based on the speakers that it knows it has, right? If I simply put that sound in the side channel of the bed, that could move much more dramatically given where that speaker assignment is in the room. It's not super dramatic because, you know, we have calibrated systems and they do a very good job. But if we're embracing what's special about Atmos and what's the true magic, the true evolution technologically and what we're experiencing here from surround as we've known it today, objects are what that is. So what I've done, and with the help of my colleagues at work, kind of like what I alluded to before, Capital is a very social place, and I can't take credit for 100% of what's in this template. We all have worked together to develop a set of tools that we all like. And all of our templates are different, but this is mine, and here we go. I just didn't want to shortchange my friends because they all contributed. Yeah, hey, you know, I mean, you know, when you work in a big studio, what you gain from that is community, and I would argue that that's the single most powerful aspect of a large studio is the group of people who work there, not the fact that they've got incredible microphones and rooms. But anyway, so what we've done and what I've done and what, you know, what we're seeing here is an object-based bed. Now, Pro Tools, one of the unfortunate limitations of Pro Tools is that you can't make buses of any size necessarily. The biggest bus I'm able to create is a 7.1.2 bus. But like we were saying, like the room I use at Capital is a 9.1.6 ultimate. As far as the objects are concerned, it's a 9.1.6. So I've created a bed and a set of busing schemes that gives me access to a 9.1.6, well, a 9.0.6 of objects. And so I have, you know, your basic stuff. I got an LCR, I got two sides, I got two rears. Then I've got what is an absolutely critical region in Atmos, which I call the front wides, but I mean, we all call them wides, which are pleasantly kind of at a midpoint between the left and the right and the sides. So, and that's really what brings our stereo image wider, because when you're sitting in the room, it's really kind of a bigger left-right as opposed to your 90-degree perspective, which is notably different physically. And then 6 overhead speakers. So, you know, 2 in the front, 2 in the middle, 2 in the side. Now, I don't think about these objects as speakers. They happen to correlate with speakers in Capital, but really what they correlate to is the real money zones of the Atmos space. And of course, this may evolve and it may change over time. That's the beauty of a template. This is version 4. Yes, yeah, this is version 4. And it's not like there are 4 of them, it's just 4.0. But anyway. So what this does, it allows me to use Pro Tools as internal busing environment to access certain zones and spaces of the room. And I can access it as a multi-channel. I can access it discretely. I can just put something in one of the pairs, one of the zones. The original low bed was zones. It was a bunch of stereo pairs that were just different places in the room. And then once we, you know, it kind of evolved into just being an actual multi-channel bed. So there are 2 main feeds into it. There's a 7.0.2 bus that I can use to feed into it, you know, in my standard bus menu, OBED 7.0.2. And then the secondary multi-channel that I created is actually the overhead 7.0, which is a completely hot-rodded 7-channel bus that has been remapped into the upper speakers. So instead of being left, right, side, side, rear, rear, it's the center's still there because I don't have anything else to do with it. But then it's, you know, overheads, front, mid, and back. So that gives me 2 primary multi-track buses that I can freely move around in my space in the Atmos mix environment. Now that's just a base level of operation, because then of course I also discretely assign different sound sources to objects discretely, and we'll talk about that as well. But so all of these green tracks here in my template represent the mechanics of that distribution system. So we have the, you know, and I've dedicated 15 objects to the job. They're all mono tracks that are taking specific subpaths of the bus and then routing them to objects that are panned to where I know I want them to be. And that's a great starting point, you know. And then these are some intermediate buses that allow me to get access to the tops. Right here, I have, you can get, the LFE is kind of its own animal, and it exists in the bed, and it's the only channel of the bed you'll see light up on any of my mixes, because it's the only way to get to the LFE. The LFE natively to the Atmos environment is not filtered, so I go through a bus that's just doing a nice low pass for me, right? So any content that I send to the LFE, I do manually off its own bus through a filter. So what ends up getting printed in my master is a filtered LFE. It's just a level of protection that I find civilized, and you know, it's just you know, one way to make your product just a little bit more foolproof on the back end of wherever it's going to end up, right? At least my sub channel, if broken out into an audio track for some reason, would be all sub content anyway. So you know,
yes,
just a little safety. And then one other thing I have in my primary bus scheme is what I call the mod rear, which is kind of modulation or modified rear bus. And what that is you know, I have the luxury at Capital of working in a scenario where you know, I've got discrete speakers for everything. But once that mix leaves, you got to be ready for it to show up and get reactualized in like virtually any ridiculous combination of outputs and speakers imaginable. The only thing you can trust is that you don't know what your material is going to get played back on. So a lot of what's really super cool about Atmos is the scaling of what it's able to do, because the mix is virtual. It'll play an Atmos mix out of 2 speakers. You know, sure, it's not sound from all around you, but the mix I made is not being, you know, withheld due to technological reasons. You can still hear the music I made. So there might be a circumstance in a mix where you have a sound somewhere in your field, but you also want to bus maybe some of it to the rear. You know, like maybe you want more coverage or something like that. And so if you have something that's in the front and something that's in the rear, and it's the same signal and it's approaching equal energy, and then you find yourself in a circumstance where they're being folded on top of each other, there are some circumstances, and not all the time, because the algorithms in the RMU are very sophisticated, but there can be some circumstances where that energy can cancel from a phase perspective. So the mod rear is just a little side tool that I use if I want to have something exist in the front and in the back and protect it from some of that phase cancellation. And so what I do to it is there are a variety of plugins I've auditioned that are capable of doing it, but I use the UAD Oxide plugin because I find that it does just enough harmonic coloration, just enough change in the sonic, like the literal sonic character of what's going on, to make it not canceled nearly as readily in a situation like that. So that's just a little built-in protection that sort of comes from, you know, experience of, you know, having something collapse on itself, you know. So that's kind of the idea going on there. And then the last thing in our green batch here is just the Dolby LTC, which is if I'm using the Dolby Audio Bridge, I need to generate time code so that we're all groovy and our metadata locks up and it's all cool. And it has this plugin that Dolby provides, and it goes to its own particular channel in the scheme. So, you know, it's just a little housekeeping tool to make sure that
never want to hear. You just want to feed it to a dummy output and get that to the renderer.
Just keeps that time code cruising. Because for those of you who know time code, and I hate time code, you have no choice.
Exactly.
You have no choice. So that's just what that is. That's just a really basic thing. And then so that's the beginning of my mix template, you know. And so yeah, all these green tracks are representative of some kind of, you know, housekeeping organizational tool set that allows me to access the Atmos environment in a way that makes sense and is friendly to me. Just a word of advice to all y'all prospective or current Atmos mixers: manipulate the IO page as much as your imagination will allow, because every answer to your routing questions exists there. You just have to maybe sometimes be a little bit more clever than in stereo, because we're dealing with just more stuff or real estate. But yeah, really work that IO page. You know, and if you hated it already, Atmos, and there's a whole new column that Atmos brings into the play, and so it's like, great, here we go. You know, just master it, and I promise you, half your problems will go away. Especially in situations where you take your mix to another studio, and you have to like assure that your IO can get rebuilt. Like, you will, I guarantee, destroy and then rebuild Humpty Dumpty multiple times IO wise during this process. And it's not something that can be avoided, and it's nobody's fault, okay? I mean, or it's everybody's fault, depending on how you want to look at it. But so word of advice, just do it. Just if you can think up some cool scheme, it'll work, you know, and then just test your delay compensation, and then after that, you'll be fine. So after that, what's up?
Well, within that, you know, would you put things like compression schemes into that same bucket of, you know, build an IO that's going to be useful, or is there you know, something else that you do?
There will be times when what you're trying to do will require some creative bussing, and I'll show you some examples of that. In terms of, well, they're just like the next couple things I want to share all exist under the subtext of creating busing schemes that suit your expression. So as we continue to move down my template, so you know, everything as we continue to scroll is all just in my template, and then the song is over on the other side, and we'll get to that eventually. But you know, so all of my template items, so the reverbs, the delays, the panners, the things that exist in my template, all ultimately feed into my OBED. So the OBED for me ends up being the output source of my effects, for now. There are of course always examples, excuse me, and if you think of anything that you like to do that has nothing to do with what I'm saying, don't worry, it's probably right, because there are no rules and we're all just doing what we can. So but these are things that I use, and like any template, it just gives me a starting point for tools that I find consistently useful. And I change them all the time. Like I will manipulate these things as we go to make my template conform to the song at hand, because the song's way more important than my template. So some of these cool things that I've got here are Slapper is a super cool delay. And I know we want to spend a minute talking about Slapper, but I'm just going to give kind of an overview of how all this stuff works, and then we can come back to some kind of specific details. So I have some auto panners, which just use your basic auto pan, which is limited to a 5.0 output. So I typically don't, that's limiting compared to the resolution Atmos is capable of. So I typically use it to enhance something that's already placed somewhere else. I just add a little bit of that spin value, because something that you'll find to be a theme in a lot of what I have to say is that putting the B in subtle with movement is your friend. Not everything has to be this rocket ship thing. I mean, rocket ships are awesome and I love it. I do it all the time. But subtle movement can really spark some magic in the Atmos environment. We'll come back to that. I have some concrete examples of that. But so that's some basic just auto pan stuff. I have 4 instances of Slapper that all do different jobs. And Slapper is a super sick multi-tap, multi-channel, next-gen delay. And like the folks down at Cargo Cult I don't know any of those men and women, but let me tell you, they are real smart, because everything about this interface is freaking brilliant. It's just genius. And we'll talk a little bit. Well, if we're here, let's talk about it now. So what you get to do with Slap. So our Atmos environment, right? We're in a bigger than multi-channel. You know, we're in a free-form space, and what Slapper can do is it has 8 different taps of delays, and it also can pan out to up to a 7. It might even go higher, but I'm limited to 7.0.2, and we can move each tap around within it. So this is a top-down view of our space, and you notice it's not so dissimilar from the way our Atmos rig shows us our space, you know, which is our mix ultimately. And we can move where in our field these taps go. And then each tap itself has all of these parameters available to it. You can add feedback, delay. You've got an overall EQ palette here. This is the amount of time, so you can set it to snap, and I can have, you know, and I can move these taps based on, my tempo map. You know, I can increase the volume of it. I can, you know, increase the time. Let's say the delay goes up as I move back, gain goes up as I move up. There's all these cool ways I can like make other things do cool stuff with it. So, you know, it's really just the interface is absolutely brilliant, and the sound and the flexibility of it is incredible, especially when you're doing tempo sync stuff. I find it to be just a wonderful new tool that expresses to me the same type of freedom and flexibility that Atmos does, in that it is simply grab and go. You know, it's not entering in a number, it's not calculating a delay value. You can just do whatever you want to do. So I've got, you know, this is my original, which is just a nice little slap that moves back in our space. You know, so you can see the colors are telling us our time and our gain, and then they're panning. So you can see I start in the front and I move to the back, and it gets quieter, and the feedback's relatively low. So that's a nice little surround alternating slap that I got going on there. This is basically the same slap, but instead of going around on my, my bass plane, it goes up and over. So it's the same concept, left, right kind of ping pong slap taps going up and over my head. And it's a really gratifying way to expand on space. And then these are left and right.
Right now to your OBED.
These are all routed to my OBED, and they're fed off of a mono bus, right? So I just send one thing out. No, that's not true. They're fed off a multi-channel bus, and you can pan within it, but I tend to kind of let it fall as it is. And so then I have versions that are just the left side of the room and the right side of the room. Nice. So those are my starting point slappers, and then of course I have my own presets for slapper that I'll use for different things. And as the mix calls for, I mean, sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Whatever, right? Template effects. That's how it goes. But that's a great plugin that integrates perfectly into the Atmos environment, and I just think it's really brilliantly put together. So I'm happy to stand here and say it's great. This here is a spread bus, and as we get into these, you'll see these groups of tracks here. These are all fed off of a single bus, right? Like a mono bus, right? Traditionally we would think of that as, mono send stereo return. Well, this is a mono send 10 channel return. And so this one is a spread, which I didn't come up with at all. That's Steve Genowick from Capital made that, and I 100% stole it from his template, and he knows that, and that's why I'm here telling you that it's his. And it's super fast delays with trims in front of them, so you see what's going on. And then so what's happening is each one of these tracks is fed by the same bus, but then outputs to a different place in my OBED. So what I have done is I've basically created a 1 in, 10 out effects engine. Nice. And each one of these different instantiations of the same plugin have slightly different parameters to them that create the same effect, but different over space and time, right? So it's like a really short delay, but it's a little brighter in the front and a little darker in the back. And you don't always have to conform to that bright in the front, dark in the back mentality, but I have found it to fit into my voice for mixing in Atmos, and in the nature of the way a lot of things work. A little bit more direct in the front and a little bit more atmospheric in the back is a kind of constant theme. And that might be seen as basic, and by no means do you have to adhere to it. And for sure I've done mixes that don't adhere to that concept. However, it is kind of a theme in a lot of these effects that you know, the front leaves a little bit more room for dry and direct signal, and the back is a little bit more atmospheric, or a little bit more filtered, or a little bit more something. Because like I was saying about space and time being one and the same, it's really dynamic to create these engines that give you that flexibility. And you might be thinking, dude, there are plenty of great surround plugins and engines that do that, and there are, and they're awesome. I don't have them all. But what this does is give me an opportunity to make this totally different all the time whenever I want. You know, I can grab, you know, the rear high and decide I want that to be a little bit longer, or I want to throw the lo-fi on for that, or something like that. And that's a theme for the rest of these. So so this is a reverb, and it's labeled 480 because I'm using the Lexicon 480, which I love, and I use because we have them at Capitol and I know it, and I also use because I find that with these particular settings, that it has a certain timbral neutrality to it that I think helps when I want to introduce a little bit of space, but not create a reverb that wasn't in the track originally. Now remember, a lot of the work I do is mixing songs that already exist. So being able to express myself at Atmos while also staying out of the way of the original you know, sonic characteristics of the mix is something that's very much to my advantage. So I personally have found that the 480 does that well. There are, of course, other great options. But yeah, so
just going to give us a quick time check because we have 30 minutes remaining in the session. I want.
Oh my God, I haven't even gotten to the song yet. Okay. Well, all right. Anyway, so that's the reverb. And then they'll have a second reverb over here that's a Valhalla, same exact deal, mono send, 10-channel return, being fed into my OBED, and that's rad. I got a quad verb here. Well, I used to call it quad verb. I should update the name because I added it's a 6 verb, and that's not as fun to say. But and that's just an overhead verb. So sometimes I like to have the space move upward as opposed to move backward or move forward. You know, there's something to, you know, especially like, you know, you get a nice snare hit and you feel it go up is a fun, you know, especially on tracks that are slower because you have more time and you can get away with that. And then the last thing I have here has these disabled plugins because they are absolute CPU hogs. But this is my Ocean Way effects plate, which is a tool I use when I'm doing something that's much more intimate, and I want it to be like you're sitting in a room, and that, you know, everything's in front of you, and what you're hearing around you is the ambience of the room you're in. I'm personally a fan of the Ocean Way plugin, and so I have a 6 wide instantiation of that has, you know, the top, sides, and rears and rear tops covered with a you know, a room, the Ocean Way room, I find it to be a compelling way to create a sort of a realistic sense of you being in the room. So that's my template. That's my starting point for a lot of these mixes, and I of course immediately deviate from that as we go.
So can I just ask you, you know, you've got this template set up already, and that's fantastic. You seem if you're looking at the renderer, we seem to have a lot of gaps in where objects are showing up. Can you talk a little bit about why you've decided to place some of these effects and routing channels in those locations?
Yeah, well, so the basic scheme of the OBED was conceptually based around creating an object bed that related specifically to the way Capitol has been building its studios. And they tend to be very effective places narratively. So that is the fundamental aspect of where those spaces are. They're your key regions in time, right? You've got your LCR main stage, and I say main stage because I sit facing my speakers, and I assume that my listener does. You know, there is some conversation all the time about walking around the room and hearing different perspectives of what's going on in the mix. And that's great and a very fun and interactive aspect of Atmos. But my mixes, and I'm just talking about me, are designed based on the idea that you're sitting in the middle looking at it. Yes, I know a lot of people don't do that, but there has to be some unifying perspective to where your listener is in relation to what's going on. You have to make some decision. If the decision is that it's going to be big and spread, then you might not separate things as much, and every speaker might have a lot of the same information in it. That might be good for some applications and not for others. I mix assuming that I'm sitting in the optimal position and that my side speakers are at 90 degrees, and everything else conforms to what we're used to as far as speaker relationships. So just that's my disclaimer. And if you disagree with me, that's awesome, because our mixes will sound different.
In terms of how you've assigned them to the renderer, we've got a gap between 25 and 37 there.
Yes. So now comes the part about assigning objects to individual sounds. And I've only used 15 objects in my OBED, and that leaves me a lot more. I have 118 total available, so I've got plenty of objects left over. And personally, I've never used all of them. I've gotten close, but I've personally never used all of the objects. And let me tell you, it's not for lack of trying. So you might ask yourself, is 118 enough? So far, yeah, it's great. It's totally great. 64 even is awesome, because half the time, if you look at this, my true object count probably doesn't even go that high. Why I have banks of objects, you ask? Well, there's another component to Atmos, and that's the headphone experience. And the headphone experience is, to use the Dolby term, binaural. And binaural uses all of these incredibly sophisticated psychoacoustic algorithms designed by some of the smartest people I have ever met in my entire life, doing things that are in, that thing about technology equaling magic. I mean, that is what these people are doing. And they're doing everything they can to design a system that gives us that externalized Atmos experience in headphones, and it's called binaural. And we as mixers are afforded different options to render a binaural mix. So every object you assign within the renderer has an option to be set on any of 4 different values: off, near, mid, or far. And these values are designed to externalize or set out into your virtualized headphone space the objects. And they use a synthesized space that our mix is placed in, and it's a neutral sounding kind of room tone. And something on near has a very intimate sound to it, and something on far has the sensation of being further away. And what does that mean? Well, you can create a sense of depth in headphones that is a plane of parameters that doesn't exist in speakers. We have found in general that when mixing Atmos and speakers, to ensure the greatest polarity and phase coherency and maintaining solid relationships between your sounds, that it makes the most sense to place your objects around the perimeter of your space. I'm not saying don't pull them off the room. I'm just saying that from our experience, in order to achieve the greatest sense of coherency in where your objects are spaced, that they are placed around the perimeter. Now you'll notice in my OBED, of course, they all are. But as we go into my mix, we'll start to see that very much the majority of these objects are placed around the perimeter of the room. And if I go to a chorus and hit play on this thing, and we look at my my actual object mix here, you'll notice everything is pretty much on the outside. And that is because as you bring things into the room, the speakers are going to do everything they can to make it sound like it's coming from there, but you cannot make a sound come from nothing. It has to come from a speaker. So if it's being, if there's a circumstance where the system's going to try and project the sound, doesn't work quite that well. So we have found that sticking to the perimeter of the room works great. And so with that in mind, once you're in headphones, that's when you start thinking about your binaural distances. So if our perimeter of our Atmos space represents our speakers and where they are, then in headphones, that plane can then be expanded or narrowed to some degree in terms of the depth or 3-dimensional properties of the objects. And that can be expressed by us by setting those specific objects to off, which is no externalization, so it's just like headphones as they exist now, near, mid, or far. And organizationally, there are some challenges that come with assembling an Atmos album. Records as we know them today, you mix 10 individual songs, you bring them into a super session, and that's often how they're mastered, and that's where your starts and stop points are decided, crossfades, continuous playback between 2 tracks, things like that. So in order to be able to do that with Atmos files, one needs to maintain a certain consistency between the different mixes of which objects are rendered to which binaural settings. Because, I might have, object 30 on this track might be a hi-hat, but object 30 on this track might be a kick drum, and they might need different rendering factors for the binaural. One I might want on near, one I might not want on far. So if you organize your object outputs to be consistent, then you can ensure that in an assembly process, your binaural settings will be maintained through different tracks. So what I have done, and it's not like I came up with this, I stole it from the movie guys, but I have predetermined banks of objects that are default rendered to different places in the binaural space. So I have I have a little cheat sheet that I keep next to my monitor. So like, for example, 26 to 36 are off, 37 to 64 are near, 65 to 96 is mid, 97 to 126 are far. So I have a predetermined relationship between where these are set. So as I'm mixing and as I'm choosing to decide which different elements of my mix are going to end up as individual objects, which tends to be most elements, in that moment, I can decide, of course you can change it later, but in that moment, I decide what that binaural rendering is going to be. How do I make that decision? It's based on experience and trial and error, and you'll develop your own sense of that. And we can go into that, but I'm now paranoid that I'm talking too much. So, so I have these banks, and that's how it's organized. So that's why you see like my first 15 are there for my bed, and then you can see I pick up on 37, that's the beginning of my nears, 65 is the beginning of my mids, 97 is the beginning of my fars. And at that point, I just assign them. There is no rhyme or reason as to what object needs to be what sound. It's irrelevant. They're all different pipes. It's simply like channels on the desk. But there are ways in which you can organize your environment to help you in the long run. And these are things that I've learned from painful experiences. And I'm hoping that my pain can be your not pain. That's a dumb thing to say. But learn from my mistakes. Or at least learn from the things that I discovered were problematic in Atmos during my experience. And I have then come up with a system to try and alleviate those problems.
Yeah.
So I guess, sorry.
No, that's great. And so, when you're doing these mixes, you're effectively creating a single mix, for headphones, for speakers, for everything. And this tool set is kind of, well, I guess yes, it's getting in your way in some ways, but it's also empowering you to do to find solutions.
Yeah, I mean, getting in my way isn't really fair. I mean, is it getting in my way when I have to get out of my chair to reach the fader on the end of the console? And there's a certain amount of just like, look, guys, we're doing something sophisticated and next gen, and it requires an incredible amount of technology and the development of that technology. And guess what? It's slightly more complicated than what we've done before. So there are some things to take into consideration that will help you in the long run in the quest to have one mix serve all of those purposes. It's a lot easier to make a mix serve only one purpose. Yeah. I mean, a lot is relative, but it's easier to do that. And if you, but trying to create that one mix to rule them all, there are some mechanisms that I have kind of evolved or adapted that help me do that more reliably and more efficiently. And having fixed object binaural assignments is one that I have found to greatly advance my ability to do that work, especially from home. Cool.
So I'm going to break us here, if that's okay with you, Nick, because I think that there are a bunch of questions that we do probably need to answer, and I think some of them are just going to address some of the other things that we were going to talk about anyway. So
let's bring them on. Let's go.
So we chatted briefly about reverbs, and you're talking about stereo engines and things like that. Do you find yourself leaning towards those versus like a multi-channel reverb? Have you played with multi-channel reverbs?
So, I'm embarrassed in this forum to admit that like I don't have a huge amount of experience with multi-channel reverbs. When I started doing this stuff, I immediately wanted to gravitate towards reverb engines that I knew, and so that's what led to building those schemes that you saw there. Plus, I thought I'd get a little bit more flexibility out of them by making them discretely movable. I can change where those outputs are going. And I was into that for sure. I do like the one that I like and is first on my list to integrate into my template is the Phoenix Verb, the R2, because it sounds great. And it's got a lot of that multi-channel flexibility that is nice and right there for you. So that's for sure on my short list of I mean, I already know I like it, so it's simply a matter of getting it together to integrate it into my template. And for those of you with sophisticated templates, I know you know that sometimes there's a little bit of like, oh, I got to change that thing that I know works really well, and I get around to it. But that's one that for sure it's simply a matter of time before I add it to my bucket of tools.
Fantastic. Somebody called out the question about the trims on the spread effects. Can you go into a little bit of detail about what you're using those trims for?
Yeah, mostly.
And we're not on screen share right now.
Oh, we're not on screen sharing. Okay, whatever. I'm a big fan of leaving my faders at 0 to start, but I might want to create different gain structures for how that spread interacts with the space. So the trims are allowing that mono send 10-channel return to have different gain levels on the different output areas. Yes, I could do that with the plugins on the delays, but sometimes I want to change the delays. Right now it's H delay. But there have been times when I've just totally corrupted the spread and made it into a multi-tap delay situation. But the trims are already in place. So you'll also, on the other, my reverbs and stuff, I have ProQ in front of it doing filtering and stuff. I am a fan of making my processes modular in that way. So the trims are setting my levels. So it's adjusting that mono send level to address the different spaces at the level that I would like as a starting point. The filters on the reverbs are the same. That way it's easier to change those values, and it's a discrete job. I mean, the ProQ sounds amazing, so it can, doing a nice filter is a real easy job for it. So I like to allow those different plugins to do specific tasks that end up being one engine. Cool. So that's just kind of my thing. It makes for a messier looking template, but more flexibility.
Fantastic. So can you, can I get you to put your screen share back up?
Sure.
So I think you received the invite there. The question has come in about the differences between loudness options.
Loudness options.
Yeah, so you have Atmos listed there and binaural. So just want to clarify for everybody there. It's always measuring Atmos. So it's whether it's doing Atmos over speakers and getting that measurement out there, or a more focused measurement for the stereo render of it. So Nick, if you click on the binaural tab there, we'll see that 15.5 in that Atmos is actually measuring 11.7 in the binaural. It's just to keep you in guidance of what should be there. So -18 is our loudness recommendation for Dolby Atmos music. That's what Nick and his colleague are mixing to, and the binaural is going to be slightly higher than that, but still well within the confines of what needs to happen. So
yes, yeah, the deliverables. So I'm very fortunate that I have a job that's creative, but make no mistake, I am part of an enormous machine, and so the material I work on is not my own, and the delivery spec is to conform to a larger scheme. So the task set before me is to deliver Atmos mixes that have an integrated loudness of approximately -18 dB LUFS by the end of the day. So the long play of the whole track measures out to that level, and that protects my material from being limited on the distribution end, which of course I don't want, because if anyone's going to touch my stuff, it better be me. So that is a decision that was made by a bunch of people who are a lot smarter than me. So and these are people I trust. So when they told me, all right, we've decided 18 is our great target goal, it will allow your mixes to be as dynamic as you to make them, I just go, great, I'm all about preservation of what I've done. So -18 it is. And I think all of my deliveries fall within probably 0.2 dB of that. You know, sometimes it can be challenging to meet a certain target, but yes, so that's the loudness that I conform to. And for all of the currently available platforms from which the listener is able to get my material, that conforms to their delivery scheme. So that is the concept there. And I'd make no effort to cheat that loudness whatsoever. My choruses are loud, my verses are intimate, dynamics are back. I will do everything I can to make that stay as long as possible, because guess what? When your chorus gets louder, it's awesome. But anyway.
Cool, awesome. Question about maintaining that that measurement. Do you use anything on your template to kind of help you stay under that -18? You know, there's multi-channel limiters in place like Fab Filter.
No, I definitely do not. One, that's a lot harder to do than it sounds without dramatically limiting your ability to express yourself in Atmos. So I try to avoid any sort of master limiting scheme. I try and mix to meet that mark, you know, and so like, of course, I have to listen, if I'm mixing something that already exists, I have to listen to the dynamics there and try and maintain those. But no, there's no one place where I have any sort of mechanism that's adhering to a limiter or any sort of gain reduction or dynamic control that's intention is to keep me at that level. I have to just be disciplined in my work and make sure that I hit that level at the end of the day. There are other ways to help with that that don't have to do with limiting, but if you print your mix into another Pro Tools session, it's very easy to then just trim everything to so your whole mix adheres to a certain level, and I do that all the time. But no, there is no master. Well, first of all, like, you know, let's be honest, there's no bus in Atmos, so there's no one place for me to put an engine to do anything. And if there was, I would be incredibly subtle with what I did there, because I want my mixing to speak for itself. I will occasionally create parallel schemes that will be a parallel compression of that 702 image. That can get complicated because it can distort your imaging with the parallel coming in slightly different locations. But depending on your mix and depending on your intention, there is a way to create a parallel compression scheme to your mix or to selective components of your mix that can help achieve that powerful squish master feel that we're so used to in stereo and want to maintain in the Atmos environment without destroying what Atmos has to offer in terms of dynamics and spacing.
Cool. So feel free to say no to this, but because it can be a little like, you know, walking in on someone in the shower. But we have a question: can we take a peek at the I/O page for the session?
Oh, you want to see my I/O page? Well, all right, for sure. Well, let's see. Let's do the thing where, you know, people can add. Never mind. All right, yeah, let's do it. Let's look at my I/O page. Okay, so here we are. We all know and love this.
There we go.
Look at that. Look at our frenemy, the I/O page in Pro Tools. Okay, so first of all, here's that extra column that Atmos decided was necessary to make this more complicated than it is. All that is assuring that there is communication between your objects and the RMU in terms of their particular set of metadata. So there is a mapping to object bridge that needs to be established. And I have found very commonly at the beginning of projects when building IOs that an absolute must-do thing, like before you even get started, is make sure that that mapping is accurate. It's super easy to do. You know, I'll just, you know, grab all of my objects and then do our good old friend cascading assignment command and click the first one, and lo and behold, they're all going where they're supposed to go. It's a one-to-one scheme, but if that's not checked, you'll know real quick. And it can really screw you up if you're importing. Like if I'm building a session and I bring in my assets, and then I import my template before I clicked that box, my template, which already has object assignments, will create redundant outputs for those objects. And then now I've got two buses and some are inactive and some are not. It's a nightmare. So for sure, when you're starting your whole project, start here and make sure that that assignment is working and that you have the good old green light for your for your communication to the RMU, which we can see not at this page at the moment, but we'll, it's there, and you want to know that it's there. Okay, so I've got my bed, which again I don't use except for my LFE, and then I've got the 118 objects, which are 11 through 128, and then I've got the two. There are two time code pipelines that the Dolby has built into the audio bridge scheme that we talked about earlier, and so I'm only using one of them, LTC 129, and that's just sending my time code for this particular environment. Then we get into the good stuff. All right, so then we've got my my scheme. So there's the OBED,
yep,
which is the main event really. It's a 7.0.2 because I'm not using the LFE, and I couldn't get it to. It wouldn't do what I needed it to do anyway. I mean, you could, but forget about it. Just don't do it. So it's a 7.0.2, and it has a couple of extra schemes within it, so that I can access particular zones of the OBED page. So there's like the LR stereo, sides, the mid-high, because I'm limited to a 0.2 for my overheads. So I can only access the middle two speakers or my middle zone of overhead from a 7.0.2 bus. So that has the mid-high. There's a couple extras, a quad, LCR, and then of course all the discrete monos, which I need for the busing scheme. Then we have what I referred to earlier, which is my overhead 7.0, which is just a manipulated 7-channel bus that gets into my overhead areas. That way I can freely pan from front to back and do all that kind of stuff. Then we have a couple of additional OBEDs, which is the wides, which I talked about, which were incredibly critical space that tends to exist, if you really want to know, on the in the Pro Tools pan scheme. You have a 201 point resolution across the sides. Plus 68 is a really great little money zone for your wides. Plus 67, plus 68, that's a critical little range right there. And so that's my hot take on that. Then I have my front highs, so the front of my room overheads and my rear of the room overheads. I've got my LFE bus, which is just piping through that filter and then being mapped directly to the bed LFE, so that it gets to the right output for that. Then there's that mod rear I talked about, which is the modified rear bus for double busing stuff that helps protect my phase coherency and polarity as we move through a variety of environments that I don't want to know about. We've got a quad overhead, which is just useful, and then we get into my FX. And a lot of these are monosyn, some of them stereo, some of them multi-channel, and they're just your typical regular template stuff, exactly. Right? This goes to my reverb, this goes to my whatever, blah blah blah. There it is. And that operates as you would expect it to if you're familiar with the Pro Tools scheming options. They just get to my effects, which end up, as I explained earlier, being bussed into my OBED, or if necessary, discrete objects.
Great. Thank you. That's awesome. So. Just want to check through the page here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Yep, okay, cool. So more generic question, I guess, for you. So one of the questions is about getting started in Atmos mixing.
Oh yeah, perfect question. Really hoping that would be the next question.
And Stephanie, maybe we can pop up the slide deck here as well, so we can get the trial licenses and things. But what would you say to somebody who wants to mix in Atmos? Is it good to have a strong fundamental in mixing in general before you get into Atmos, or what do you
any experience that you have mixing will of course be relevant in your experience mixing in Atmos. However, there is no prerequisite experience necessary in anything at all to do anything creative ever, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll show up with a sock full of nickels. There are no rules. Forget about rules. Forget about what you think is important in terms of your stereo stuff. Just allow yourself to explore the space. First and foremost, nothing hurts you to grab that object and move it around. If you don't like where it ends up, you can move it again. One of the things that is a huge advantage of Atmos over stereo is because you have so much extra real estate, a lot of that sacrificial EQ work that we do in order to make stuff fit. You know, the example we always use when I talk about this is distorted guitars and string orchestra. Yes, they happen at the same time all the time, and they occupy a lot of the same harmonic range. Well, typically in stereo, because we have some limitations in our size, we might remove certain frequencies from one or the other in order to make them fit better within that space. My recommendation to you is before you start doing that kind of thing, move them around your space. Start with movement before processing and EQ and that kind of thing. Because you might realize that, you know, so much about, Steve Genoa taught me this, all of our tools exist to fix problems. EQ is there to fix a problem. Compression is there to reduce a dynamic range that already existed. You may find that you don't need to do that as much when you have so much more real estate to go in. So what I would say is you're getting started mixing. Maybe you've never done surround, maybe you've never done anything. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Listen to your song, listen to the arrangement. What are the different voices doing? What's clashing? A great first thing to do is, you know, you got a piano and an organ at the same time. That's two really dense things. Spread them out. See how it feels to you to hear those sounds coming from different locations before you start carving away at them, because you might realize that, oh, you know, if I leave the piano in the front and put the organ in the back, I don't have to change the tonality because they were really well recorded and they sound great as they are. When I solo it, it sounds great. Why doesn't it sound that way in the track? Guess what? It most likely will much more if you move things around in the Atmos space before you start affecting them in order to sound better within their space. So before you reach for your favorite EQ, before you reach for your favorite compressor or whatever, distortion box, I don't care, address the panning and address your staging in your space and figure out how you want all of your compositional elements to relate to each other. I'll never tell you to do anything specific. There are, of course, some conventions that we have found tend to work better. If you look at a lot of consumer playback devices, they're all front oriented. Not all of us can put 20 speakers in the room, which means you're going to get the absolute best power out of the stuff that you put in the front. So me, yes, I tend to put my drums and bass in the front because I know that on any given system, that's going to have the best physical resources to reduplicate hard transients and extreme low end. Now, do you have to do that? Absolutely not. Am I telling you to do that? Absolutely not. But when it comes back to that intention, when it comes back to that idea that like I mix for someone who sits in the middle of the room and is looking at the front, then there are certain conventions and certain elements that tend to be more successful than others. But I encourage you wholeheartedly to experiment and find out what those are for yourself, and even better to prove me wrong, because it means we will have moved forward in the art form. So all of those things are relevant, but start with addressing the space first. You might think I'm going to mix this in stereo and then I'm going to Atmosifize it. No, throw that idea away. You're not mixing in stereo, you're mixing in Atmos now. So address that first, because you will then learn what of your other bag of tricks you will need to use to express yourself. But just remember that there are some things that you've been doing that you don't need to do anymore or are different. And so the best way to understand what those things are, the way your workflows will change, the best way to do that is to grab the bull by the horns and move that stuff around and really just explore the space. You know, figure out how those things relate to each other and how it's there to aid your ability to storytell. It's not a gimmick, it's a tool, and use it to your advantage. And if you don't automate movement, doesn't matter. You've used it, you've used the space. So I would say if you're starting out, start right where the critical stuff is, and that is your staging, your space, your real estate, wides, overheads, sides, rears, the relationship moving from front to back, left to right. Start there, start with the cool, fun stuff. And then as your mix starts to develop the identity that you're looking for, then you can start to apply all of those extra cool elements too. But that would be my, you know, my word for someone just starting out. Start with the space. Start with what this tool does best. Everything else will follow.
So we have 1 minute left because we started 1 minute late. I promised you an elevator pitch. So you're a Capital, you're in A, you're tracking, you're sat with an artist, sat with a producer. What do you say to drag them across to Studio C?
Real easy, because I've said it many times before. Hey, you want to hear something you've never heard before? You want to hear music like you have never heard it before? You want a genuinely new experience with media consumption, or just what you love about music? Then let's go. Come on. Let me show you something that's new.
Have you ever had somebody say no?
No. I've never had anyone say no, and I've never had anyone leave the room with their jaw anywhere other than the floor, because it is a one. I'm not kidding, and I'm not trying to talk us up here. I'm just the raw numbers. It is a 100% success rate. If I'm in the studio and I bring someone in and say, "Hey, you want to hear something cool?" You know, it's not, and I'm not all my mixes either. Just the format, just really successful reproductions of music that we know and love. So it's worked every time.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and you know, I'm really glad that we got the chance to do this.
Me too.
I'll buy you barbecue some other place, but
fabulous.
Yeah, really looking forward to getting back together, and thank you so much for all of you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, really, thanks for being here.
Has been recorded and will be available later, so Nick and I can paint over it at great length later.
Yeah,
so
I love hearing myself talk.
So just to mention some housekeeping here, we have a professional.dolby.com site. You can get access to a free 30-day trial of Tidal and Amazon Music HD, as well as a free 30-day trial of Dolby Atmos Production Suite. So scan those QR codes, pop in the URLs into your web browser there, and feel free to reach out with any more questions after the session. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Nick, for taking the time to share your knowledge, and look forward to hearing what you guys create.
Absolutely, my pleasure. All right.
Cheers.